everyone, and welcome to our panel for today. It's so great to have everyone here. I'm Catherine Martinez de Leon, and I'm the Director of Events for the LA chapter of the Children's Media Association, and I will be your host for this panel. So before we kick it off, I wanted and introduce our panelists. I wanted to take a moment to reintroduce CMA for those of you who might not know us well or might be new members. CMA exists to connect the dots across the kids and family media industry, that we come from different disciplines. We are a community of makers, thinkers, and innovators. We believe that by learning and playing together, we strengthen ourselves, our community, and content for kids. And we have chapters in New York, in LA, and in San Francisco, and virtual members all around the world. And we believe CMA is helping to build the future of our industry. Also, CMA is run entirely by volunteers. And although we already have a great team working behind the scenes, we're always looking for new people to join and help us out. So if you are currently a member and you're interested in helping us out, please look on our site, reach out. We always love to add new volunteers to our team. And as a reminder, your CMA membership offers lots of benefits and perks, including panels like this. But we also have a job board. We have a video library full of all previous panels. We have member discounts. We have our mentorship program, workshops, other events, both in person and virtual. So just follow us on social media, check it out. We have lots of offerings coming up in the next few months, including a panel right after this. So definitely check out what we have coming up for the rest of the year. So today we are so excited to have some wonderful, amazing showrunners, producers from DreamWorks Animation behind the two new preschool series, Dewdrop Diaries and Not Quite Narwhal. So Dewdrop Diaries came out a few months ago in July. It follows a group of 3-inch tall fairies, or as they're known in the fairy world, dewdrops. And they live inside a teensy fairy house on a brownstone balcony gardens in what's called the big city. They've all been assigned to human families, and they secretly help out around the house with little things that can often fall through the cracks. And it's a great, cute, adorable show created by the one and only Rick Suvalle, who's the creator and executive producer. Prior to Dewdrops, Rick developed and produced Mattel's Thomas and Friends, All Engines Go series. He served as the writer on many other animated series, including DreamWorks Doug Unplugs, Disney Junior's Tots, Miles from Tomorrowland, Esme and Roy, and many others. He's also, outside of animation, has written TV movies and developed series for DreamWorks, Disney, and Apple, Amazon, Fox, Mattel, many others. So thank you, Rick, for joining. Next up on the Dewdrop Diaries team, we have Aliki Theophilopoulos.
Ooh, good.
Okay. Who served as executive producer on the series. Aliki has also worked on Doug Unplugs along with Rick. Also served as supervising producer on Harvey Girls Forever for Netflix. She started her career animating on films at Disney Feature, such as Hercules and Tarzan, before moving into television as a story artist, writer, director, and EP on numerous series, including Descendants, Wicked World, Phineas and Ferb, where she was nominated for an Emmy as both a writer and songwriter. And she also currently serves as the EP on Disney television animation Zombies, the Reanimated series, based on the hit live-action movie franchise. And she has a few additional projects in development at Disney currently. So welcome, Aliki.
Thank you.
All right, so then for our second series that we're also focusing on tonight, we have Not Quite Narwhal, which was released back in June. And this series follows the curious and fun-loving kelp, who always believed he was a narwhal, like the rest of his family under the sea, until the day he made the most amazing discovery that he's actually a unicorn. Rather than choose one or the other, kelp embraces being both a narwhal and a unicorn. He takes on juggling his day-to-day life in his stride and figures out how to navigate his two worlds, the ocean and the land. So great new series. Brian K. Roberts currently serves as the co-executive producer on the current series. Over the last 10 years with DreamWorks Animation, Brian has served as animator, director, and producer on numerous award-winning series in previous roles. He's also been co-executive producer at DreamWorks Animation, where he helped bring to life Dragon's Rescue Riders, VeggieTales. Oh, Rescue Riders, so Heroes of the Sky. Is that two separate things?
It was a Peacock spin-off of a spin-off.
There, the spin-off of that. Got it. And also VeggieTales. And he also served as consulting producer on Gabby's Dollhouse. It's also DreamWorks and Netflix.
Yeah, looks like I need to update my bio. Sorry about that.
No worries, Brian. Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us. And last but certainly not least, we have Sarah Caton, who, along with her writing partner, Nakia Trower-Truman, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us today, currently serves as co-EP on Not Quite Narwhal. Prior to developing Not Quite Narwhal for television, they both served as writers on DreamWorks' Boss Baby, Back in Business, also Apple TV's Pretzel and Puppies, PBS's Arthur and Curious George, as well as Disney Junior's Fancy Nancy and Netflix's Mighty Express. And I guess you two met while teaching English in South Korea, and you both still have, or are working together and have multiple projects in development around town, right?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, thank you all four of you for joining us today. I know that when we first kind of approached you all, we were all really excited to kind of have a conversation about both your shows and the differences between the development processes that you guys have been through, and just in general kind of going through production at the same time, because both the shows were put into development around the same time, they were greenlit around the same time, and then they were released around the same time. So we're excited, just hear about your experiences, compare and contrast, also how the stories developed, being that Not Quite Narwhal obviously came from a book, and Dewdrop Diaries was an original idea from Rick. But before we get started, I want to also remind everyone out in the audience that the last 10 minutes of the panel will be reserved for Q&A. So throughout the panel, if you have questions that come up, please just comment. Either if you're watching through StreamYard, comment through there, or if you're watching via the stream on LinkedIn, just put in comments, and we will be looking at those come the end of the panel. So let's jump in, shall we, guys?
Let's do it.
All right. So as I was saying, really kind of, we wanted to first kind of start with the development process for both of these, because obviously both shows, wonderful shows, but very different processes, being, like I said, one was an IP and one was an original idea. So I guess, Rick, could you kind of start us off in kind of talking about the different steps in your development process, at least I guess how it is with DreamWorks, like in general, for any kind of show that kind of goes into development there?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, sure. In terms of my show being original, so I'm not sure. I'm sure you'll hear different from Sarah and Brian in terms of developing something internal with IP and stuff like that, or I don't know if they even brought it to DreamWorks. But for my idea, it was based on initial pitch. I kind of went in with a 3-page idea and a couple of drawings that I had my neighbor do for me to kind of sweeten my presentation. And I kind of pitched some executives there, and they gave me some notes that I kind of incorporated and sent back to them. And at that point, they called me actually on my birthday to let me know that they wanted to move forward with the show, with developing it. And so we made a development deal. That's its own kind of step unto itself. It takes a while. And after that, we immediately started kind of designing the character of Eden, one of the fairies in the show, as well as background art. Well, I was working on a pilot and the Bible at the same time, because they kind of feed each other, so one was informing the other. And then we took the opening scene from my pilot, and we created an animatic teaser for the show during that development process. We also did like a 30-second full animation test. And over the course of the development period, we also designed the other 2 fairies and their fairy houses. And so we had all of that done by the time we pitched Netflix. And, after we sold the show and Aliki came on board, we started refining the look of the show thanks to Aliki. And, and I started writing a couple more scripts. That was kind of the Dewdrops development process at DreamWorks.
Got it. That's amazing that they called you on your birthday. I love
Yeah,
that.
they had no idea. I don't even think I told them because I'm like, that's kind of weird if I say something. So
What a great present.
yeah, it was great.
That's amazing. So then for Brian and Sarah as well, how did the process differ for you all? Because I'm assuming you guys were attached later that DreamWorks acquired the IP.
Right. So Vanessa Taylor Sands was also the development exec that Rick worked with on Dewdrops. Was she the first person you pitched to, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when was that? When was that first contact for Dewdrop?
Gosh, it was probably like September of 2017.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So
That's way before Narwhal.
That's amazing. Well, not that much further, because one of the first things that Vanessa got when she started at DreamWorks, which probably was 2017, was she was handed the book, Not Quite Narwhal, and said, here, do something with this. And so she had it on her desk for a long time and had started developing it with another EP who ended up moving on to another opportunity. And so I think it sat around for a while waiting for the right team to come along. And then she approached Sarah and Nakia about doing a take on it. So you want to talk about that, Sarah?
Yeah, so that was 2019. So that's a good 2 years after you pitched to Vanessa. But it was, at the time we were staffed on Boss Baby still, and we were just meeting different people in the studio. And we had just a general with Vanessa. And when we went into her office, she had her office is great because it's got all the toys, the books and everything around it, and just like this plethora of children's books. And she's like, what do you like? And we both, Nikki and I, without even like discussing, because we're like that sometimes, we just both reached for Not Quite Narwhal. We want this one because if you've seen the cover, it's just an adorable little unicorn. It really grabs you. And once we read the book and we were so captured by its like sweet, simple message, we just really fell in love with the book and we gave them our take. So that's how that happened.
When you sided with Vanessa, like this is what you want to do, kind of where did it go from there?
The steps were, she asked us, and she was asking lots of writers at the time, so it wasn't necessarily our project yet. But just to give it like just a short take, like our take, like a 2-page take, I think was what we ended up giving her. Kind of like very like broad strokes on what we saw as the show and what we would want to do to it, and kind of like how we would interpret from book form to series form. That's what we presented to Vanessa, and that's when she liked our take and she had us brought on. And then there was a lot of development from then. From there we developed a fully fleshed out Bible with getting more into the details, like story ideas, all of the characters, the world, start building all of that stuff up, and actually writing a first script for the series. That was all part of the development process before we went to pitch it and sell it.
Got it. And so, yeah, and you both these shows ended up on Netflix. Was that still under the DreamWorks? I know DreamWorks had a deal with Netflix for a while. Was it still under that, or was it just you guys literally went out and pitched both these, or?
I think it's after that huge initial deal, it got a little more complicated as far as like I don't know much about it, but I think we were sort of separate. We were a separate purchase from any bigger deals, but I might be wrong about that. I do know we were the first 2 shows to sell under COVID because we were queuing up to pitch. In our case, I think it was like late April, May. And so we were really moving. We had spent that whole spring. I got brought on to help produce an animation test. So we took Sarah and Nakia wrote just a really little scene about a minute. And I helped produce, all of the character designs, and then it all had to be built and rigged and modeled and lit, and because it was a full CG test. And so we were doing that over the spring and expecting it to be ready to pitch. I think early May was the hope, and then everything shut down the end of March, and we didn't even know if Netflix was going to be taking pitches. And so we were the first shows to do a completely virtual pitch over Zoom. And I recall it once we pitched, it went pretty quickly. I don't know about for you guys, Rick and Aliki, but
ours was kind of a interesting journey. Ours was still part of the Netflix deal. We actually had pitched in, I think, December.
Okay.
Before COVID had shut everything down, so it was all in person. And it was part of that Netflix first look deal that they had at that point that might have ended by the time you guys started. And so we didn't get picked up until probably April, maybe when you guys pitched, maybe it was the same time, but I think we had pitched all the way in December, and it was 6 months later when we actually got picked up.
I think we got picked up in June, so it was around the same, literally probably.
Pick up, Rick, on Dewdrops?
What's that?
When did you get the official pickup on Dewdrops?
It was probably April of 2020. So COVID had just started.
Okay.
So I think it was April. Actually, it was probably May. Maybe it was May or June. I can't remember because I remember starting a couple months later, which would have been June. But I think we had kind of an interesting journey, which was Netflix actually initially passed on the show with us because they had another fairy show in development. And so we were around kind of pitching it elsewhere afterwards. And then during that 6-month period, I think the other fairy show fell out. And they said, is it still available? And we're like, yes. Yes, it is.
I think that's an important thing to note about just the whole development process. The entire process is sort of building support and not getting people to not say no. So at every level, so, you start with somebody like Vanessa as your development person, and you're working with them to build their support and their excitement and getting them excited about the possibilities and about what you specifically bring to the project. And at no point do you want them to go, I'm not sure about this, right? So you're always listening to their feedback. You're always listening to their concerns. You're taking what they're saying and helping make the show better. And then when they get to a certain point that they're really excited and confident, then they take it up a step of the ladder. And then you're doing the exact same thing again. You're building support and excitement at that level and getting them to not say no by, listening to them and making them feel heard, getting them excited about what you're bringing to the table and what you're doing. And so that just keeps going, up and up until eventually they're excited enough that they're, letting you pitch it outside or, to whatever partners they have lined up. But it's really just a process of building excitement and support and not letting people say no.
I think, Brian, that's such a good point because there's a lot of times when things are being pitched where you're not going to be in the room anymore. So like that time that you have with your development executive that you're working with, hopefully they're feeling a little bit of a partnership with you because they'll feel a little bit more invested in the project. And if they're excited about it and you're excited about it, then that excitement is going to show when they often, without you, are in a room with that next person and then they're sharing about the project. So being able to relay how you're feeling, what you're creating with that partnership, and then their ability to then take that onto that next room is really, really important to the process.
And I always kind of say that development is almost like sales, where you're selling it to each additional level. And like it said, you're often as the creator, often as EPs, you're not in that room. So you're just hoping that you have articulated enough to make that sale to your exec and they can carry it on. Right.
And that's why your leave behind materials have to be so strong. And I think that's why DreamWorks put so much time and effort into what they do. They do the animation test. They do, animatics. We write scripts so that the work can help speak for itself when you can't.
Completely.
Yeah, and I think the DreamWorks development process, like the shows are, because there were 3 for me, and I've noticed that the development process is in preparation for series. It's not like, well, we'll just develop and see what happens and see what people like. It's development with an eye on if this were to go to series, we know the characters, we have a look, we have some ideas of where the show is going to go. Like there's a really strong base before moving it into production.
I was wondering also off of that, Rick, with you having this original idea, were there any insights you got from executives or to fit with the DreamWorks brand or to fit maybe what, like you were saying, what Netflix was looking for once they no longer had another fairy series? Was there anything particular that you kind of really leaned into, any comps or any, I know you're talking about all the different materials, but was there anything you kind of learned from that process about how to kind of defend your show?
Yeah, I mean, it was always about making the show stand out, and because there are other fairy shows. We're an original show, so we're kind of trying to stand out from the pack, right? And it's so hard to be an original these days because it's hard to advertise it. You know, if you're based on a book, you know, there's that built-in IP. There is an audience out there for it. There was no audience for our show, and so you know, we had to kind of. I think the interesting thing in part of the development process was when I first pitched the show, they weren't even fairies. They were these little creatures, little characters that it's the same premise that would secretly help little kids and take place in the city and all that. And DreamWorks, you know, for the DreamWorks magic, what's special about it? They said, could they be fairies? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I say I got to think about it because to me, the little characters were these metaphors for little kids doing big things, right? And so they're having these Herculean efforts to help the kids that they watch. So I was worried that if you give them magic and flight, you're kind of taking away that agency that the kids have. So I kind of thought about it for a while, and I went back to them and I said, hey, what if we made them fairies in training? They've got wings, but they can't fly yet. They haven't earned their magic wands yet. But because it's a show about, you know, about fairies, we can give them each one magical power. And maybe as a team, they can work together and use those powers to help them overcome, but still they have the same difficulties that these little characters I originally envisioned would have. And DreamWorks loved that idea because I think also being fairies in training was kind of fresh. We hadn't really seen fairies in that light before. We hadn't really seen fairies in the city before. That was another thing that they really responded to because we were always seeing them in the forest, in the glen, and you know, just to see them in the city was just another fresh take on fairies. So I think those were two things that really felt like DreamWorks, different, original, and you know, after we kind of had that fairies in training conversation, we were kind of off and running in the right direction.
But if you just dug in your heels and said, no, this is what I want, and not been collaborative, you know,
I wouldn't be here today.
No.
Such a good point to talk about that there really is this collaboration going on with the studio, with your executives, and it's constantly this kind of question, I think, when you're developing of like, where do I stick to? Like, this really needs to be this. Like for Rick, there was the like, yeah, but they shouldn't be full-fledged fairies yet. It really needs to be that they're in training. This doesn't feel right. But at the same time, he also had the openness of like, yeah, maybe they could be fairies. Like, let's see what is exciting for you with that, and like could work in partnership with the development executive and find that fine balance between like knowing what core needed to stay there while being open to ideas from the studio perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about like the executives at DreamWorks is they really are your partners in this process. It's not like an adversarial thing that that you hear about executives. They really want to make the best show possible, and they're asking those probing questions. And sure, you can get to the point where like, I don't know if I want to do that one, but you have this great conversation. I remember having a funny conversation with Vanessa about, she's like, well, how do they communicate with each other? They're in different houses. They certainly don't have fairy cell phones, right? I go, of course not. And right in the moment, I'm like, they've got the do alerts. They're like the bats. Right there in that moment, in that improvised conversation, we had a new feature for the show. And so it's just I just love the magic of the dialogue that goes on with executives and anybody creative. It's wonderful.
Right. All the iterations. It's a team effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to pass over to Sarah, because I wanted to ask kind of the same question I asked Rick. For you, for kind of trying to defend your take on this New York Times bestselling book, was there anything that kind of you learned through that process with trying to defend your and Nakia's take on Not Quite Narwhal?
I think what the panel's already saying about being open is the key. Being open, and then also knowing what is true to you and what's important to you, and knowing that like, okay, you can stay true to yourself and have a different way of executing it with like suggestions that come to you. So I think what was key to us, I think Nikki and I always we're always drawn by theme. Like if we could wrap a series around a theme, it feels kind of like the beating heart of the show. And so the theme in Narwhal was quite strong. So when notes and suggestions and changing things came in, for us, we were lucky in the situation. It rarely touched the theme. So we were open to all kinds of ideas and suggestions as we moved forward in the development process. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting to hear, yeah, both of you touching on that, because it is such an important part. I think for a lot of young writers don't realize, like, when you finally get something into development, it's going to be very collaborative. It's going to be a lot of give and take, like hearing people out for what their notes, both good and bad, right?
And
deciding what fits your vision, right?
Yeah, sometimes things change based on circumstances that are out of anyone's control. Like, so initially in the development process, part of our like 2-page, like the take that got us the job, that we don't know if this is true, but me and Nikia suspect that this little angle we had was what kind of drew them to us. We had such a strong musical component, like Kelp the little unicorn. He was a musical learner. He processed through like song and dance, and we had this whole idea that was gonna be a very musical show, and they were really big on that. And we even pitched it to Netflix as a musical show. And then when it came time to make the show, there was no budget for this music, so that totally changed. But part of development.
They're still pretty musical, I feel like.
It is. We got as much music as we could get.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes up when you're working with a book is, if the author's alive, that becomes a factor as well. And we had the great fun of working with Jessie Sima, who's the author and illustrator of the book. And it was great because when Jessie would come in, it was just sort of at these little checkpoints, and we would get to show them, all this fun stuff we were doing. And they really just got to, even though the show is not the book, it's an evolution of the book. The art's different. There's new characters. Jessie just always really delighted in seeing the evolution and the changes we were doing. And they were always like so supportive and enthusiastic. So that was, I think on certain adaptations that could be difficult or challenging. And in this case, it was just super fun getting to show them how we were taking their ideas and their themes and their character and, making it this whole other thing. And they were so supportive. It was fantastic.
That made us feel so good when the show even came out and Jessie was tweeting about how she felt like the show really captured, again, the message of the book. And that meant a lot to us, that we did them proud. So
I think that's so important. And you're right, often you don't get that from the original writer. So that's wonderful. It's a wonderful vote of confidence. So I think moving off of that, moving into kind of like the whole writing process, the whole production, as you guys are writing more and more of the episodes. For both, I guess, Rick and Sarah again, what are some of the things you guys kept in mind while kind of focusing your writing for the preschool audience when you were figuring out these different episode ideas, the different characters that the main characters are going to interact with? What kind of led that for you? I guess we can start off with Rick.
What to keep in mind when writing preschool, or
just as you were kind of developing the series and you were thinking of the preschool audience, how did you maintain that? I know obviously you have a lot of experience in it, but was there anything particular with this show that you kept in mind?
It's just the general writing of preschool, is always, for me, it's always, kids don't understand the concept of time like adults do. I just know that, like, when my kids were little, they'd say, "Give me 5 more minutes," and you'd be like, "No, we got to go now." Like, "Give me 10 minutes," and you're like, 5, and they're like, "Okay." I mean, they don't understand time. Like 2 minutes go up, and you're like, "The 5 minutes are up," and you're out the door. So you have to find different ways of telling stories because they don't understand stakes and ticking clocks in the same way. They understand the ice cream will melt before it gets to the park, and they understand when I was writing for Thomas, if he was bringing a roller coaster car to an amusement park, it would be, like, if he doesn't get there, it's not going to happen. The carnival's not going to happen. So, it's those different ways of telling stories, you have to keep in mind, and you have to, you have to kind of be in the moment, right? In preschool writing, you can't talk about something off screen like you would in a sitcom. You kind of have to be in the now. And I've talked about this before in other places, that it's like I had a non-preschool writers come in sometimes, and they would do these jokes that were just kind of 6 to 11 jokes. That were like, "Hey, something bad's happening. Let's throw our hands up in the air and run around in circles and scream." And I'm like, no. They actually have to run around in circles and scream. They can't comment on it, So it's, that's just an older joke that SpongeBob would do, So it's about, figuring out the humor and restating the goal many times in an episode. That's a big thing to do in preschool. You know, every few pages, you want to remind them that the ice cream is going to melt before it gets to the park, just to keep on task. You know, in our show being, it was almost bridge, right? It was, because we had a little more danger with fairies running into the city and these little characters. So it was more about making sure, our gut check S&P was going on, that they weren't running too close to the edge of the balcony. And, we didn't want to have babies, our kids standing on a chair on books to reach something. Sometimes our storyboard artists would try and do that and be like, sorry, we can't really show that kind of stuff. So I think all that stuff is always in the back of my mind when I'm writing for preschool.
Completely. No, those are some great tips, honestly. I think people who aren't used to writing and for that audience, wouldn't catch on. Yeah, and I wouldn't think about like the danger of what you're showing on scene. You don't want to show them falling off the balcony.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
And so I guess for you as well, was there anything particular that came up while you were writing for Not Quite Narwhal?
Well, exactly what Rick said about that, kind of like keeping things present and in the moment and like showing what you're seeing and all of that is very true. And we also had, our show is a very socio-emotional show. Brian actually coined it a socio-emotional adventure comedy. So it was kind of had a lot of fun stuff in it. And we were very lucky that we had a lot of consultants that would advise us sometimes on our scripts, because Nikki and I, being a socio-emotional show, we would want to, in our experience writing preschool, we were limited in like the emotional bandwidth we could have sometimes with our characters. They'd be allowed to be happy or very happy, and we would kind of play in that world. And we wanted to we feel like we wanted to be appropriate to a preschool audience, but also be able to maybe do some episodes with emotions that aren't as explored. Like we did an episode on sadness where a character is dealing with being sad. And typically, I guess in an episode like that, we got a lot of notes in the beginning, maybe about, well, why is he sad and how are we going to fix it by the end? But the arc for that particular episode wasn't with our sad character. It was with Kelp, his arc was not trying to fix his friend. It was trying to be just there for his friend, and it was okay that his friend was sad in this episode. So this one, we would have a consultant that could advise us on, this is getting a little too heavy for a preschool. This is kind of more of the language you'll need to use when dealing with topics like this. So we had that as a resource that DreamWorks provided for us. So that was lovely to always make sure that we were always keeping it in a preschool level.
That's one of the things that's fun about doing preschool at DreamWorks is they do have a really broad approach to it, while still trying to be very child-centered and aware of the child's developmental needs and emotional needs. And it really bothers me when I see people where it feels like you're trying to push the envelope of preschool. I'm like, let's not push the envelope. Let's just broaden the view, which, bringing more emotion into it and really honest character situations, but in a way that's kid appropriate.
I think a big thing, and you guys touched upon it a little bit, is just the seeing what you say aspect of things like that. I mean, I did a couple preschool shows, and now I'm back in the 6 to 11 space, and it's funny. I'm like, well, don't we need to see that? Well, we don't, do we? Oh. Like I'm reminded of how we really needed to show in our visual storytelling what was going on and make sure that that's really clear. Even if somebody was saying something, it might be a little conceptual or hard to understand. So having those visuals, really clear visuals, always helped sell an idea. So we wouldn't leave kids with questions. They could be like along with the ride that was intended in the script.
And I was just to say, the emotional thing that Sarah was talking about is the interesting thing on the Dewdrops was, we had the Dewdrops looking after these kids, but we saw the emotions through our Dewdrops and kind of a different, it was almost like a mirror of what was going on, because the kids, for example, we did an episode about first sleepover, and the Dewdrop is worried that their kid is going to have a bad time and be scared. And what they learned by the end is the kid wasn't scared at all. It's like, but they were having those kid emotions. So it was a way to almost like separate it so the kids watching could kind of, okay, I get it. And the kid's okay. It was kind of a fun way to kind of separate emotions a bit. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I did watch that episode, and yeah, no, that was really, I was thinking that same thing as I was watching it. I was like, oh, that's how the kids could understand it, is because the fairies are worried, but really the kid, showing that the kids don't, don't need to be worried about, things all being a particular way. Yeah. So I guess another question for Aliki and Brian. So you guys went into production / development kind of around the time when there were more conversations about diversity and inclusion, especially in like casting choices and in story choices. What were some of the, I guess, how did you take that in consideration while you guys were working on these two shows? Aliki or Brian?
What was great is, again, there had been some really wonderful development work started before I came on to the show. So I got to come in at this great moment where there are a lot of these, more than ever in my whole career at this moment, conversations about diversity and inclusion, and making sure we could do that in a way that just honored different marginalized groups, in a way that didn't feel like, because the thrust of our show was, there were different things that our show was about. So it wasn't about like making the show about it, but just making sure that we had visual representation in our main characters and body types and kind of across the board. So for me coming on, it was really just making sure, especially in honing the designs for the three main fairies, particularly Athena and Phoebe, to really, really deep dive and make sure that our designs were just accurate, and that we could make sure that kids watching that might be a part of a diverse group could see themselves in the character. And again, DreamWorks is amazing because we have a lot of consultants on hand to help us with that. Right down to making sure Phoebe's hair was represented correctly. So it's something I think for everyone, the responsibility at that time was a little bit newer, but something everybody was committed to and wanted to do right. So we really paid a lot of attention to just every aspect of this and all of our conversations. And that could be anything from the emotional storytelling, talking to consultants about the what gratitude provides kids and families, to a body type, to a hair type. I mean, all of that. There was very careful consideration to the choices that we made for the show. That's also the same with our human characters, the family dynamics and setups. We wanted to make sure that, even in an African American family or a Black family, that they could look at Phoebe as their fairy and say, hey, that fairy looks like me. That was intentional and important to us. And again, too, body types, we wanted to make sure we represented different types of body types in our show, which we worked hard to make sure and do as well.
I know. I feel like that body types often people forget that it's part of diversity and showing different types. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really is. It's really important. Like I think with Athena, she's strong. She's a dancer. She's athletic, and for me, I really had fun with like pushing how well she dances and how light she can be on her feet, but then how tough she can be as a really strong individual. And this was something that was not dictated by like, oh, this body type is supposed to be this one way. Like we embraced this wonderful body type that she had, and it was wonderful. And we've gotten to do that a few times. I have to say at DreamWorks, like starting with Harvey Girls Forever, this is something that has been important to us for a while now, but getting to really shine a light on the importance of this at that moment in time was something that I think we all welcomed and got a lot of support for.
Yeah, definitely a very similar experience. I think the big difference on Narwhal is that thematically, inclusion, diversity, representation was like at the very heart, to those themes that Sarah was talking about earlier. So, DreamWorks is and has been a real trailblazer in that area, but in this show, we pushed it even further and spent a lot of time, even things as simple as like, if unicorns can be any color, how do you make them black? Right? And so like Leaky said, we had consultants talking to us about things like texture and color, and we're having conversations like, if a unicorn is supposed to be coded as black, do they need to have brown eyes? Or like and that's, Sarah was always really attentive to making sure we didn't make every character have blue and green eyes, because I think in fantasy character shows, that's a tendency to just, everybody has blue eyes. And so, we were having conversations like that, and just looking at intersectionality and trying to avoid tokenism. So like we had this one character who was a boy unicorn coded as black, who wore glasses and also spoke using like non-verbally, communicated non-verbally. And so there's like all these layers of, different types of identity wrapped up in this one character. And so we were always looking at opportunities like that of how could they have these layered identities and intersectional identities, making the show, more complex and more representative. And then even things as simple as like making sure we were gender balanced, right? Because our main group of characters, of the kid characters, there's like 6 characters. And at one point in development, it was like 4 boys and 2 girls. And I said, like, there's this Gina Davis rule of like, what if you took a character who's male and just made it female without changing anything else? And so we did that to one of our characters so that we would have a gender balanced cast. And it ended up making really like the favorite character of a lot of people.
Which character was it?
Unique. It's Juniper, the little green unicorn.
That's what I thought.
Juniper used to be a boy called Pom Pom. And then when I realized like, oh, we've got 4 boys and 2 girls, how could we make it 3 and 3? It's like, well, what if we made Pom Pom a girl? And we didn't change anything else about them.
Not even the design, because Pom Pom was already designed.
Right.
So we didn't even change the design.
That's amazing.
Well, we changed the design later then again for other reasons, but at that time we didn't change the design.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's like the challenge with both your shows, given like you said, it's like magical creatures, different colors, diversity is a little bit different to show in those kind of scenarios. But you both, yeah, from what you guys said, and from what I've seen about the series, yeah, you guys really accomplished that.
Another thing I'll add to that too is I think there has to be a lot of grace in those conversations, like all the way around, like 360, just, because you're really, I mean, I guarantee you we were the first creative team that's ever talked about unicorns with prosthetic limbs. Like, I've never seen it in another show. I'm pretty sure we were the first unicorn with a prosthetic limb. And it leads to some, sometimes awkward conversations because people are bringing in all of their own, biases and ableism and, just like uncomfortable things to talk about sometimes. And so you really have to have a lot of grace and goodwill towards each other and just be okay that it's uncomfortable for a little while, but just work together to find solutions that, that everyone's excited about and supportive of.
Because we're all just learning and getting better at it. Yeah.
Totally.
All right. Well, I know we have a couple more questions we did want to ask. I know one question that came up for Rick in kind of developing your show and creating it, because it seems like there's a really strong focus on teaching kids about using gratitude as a coping mechanism. What really inspired that theme for you? Did you go in wanting to focus on that theme, or was it something you kind of figured out later on, or I was inspired by your 2 daughters?
It definitely came later. I think we're originally not going to be a curriculum show, or I mean, it's not really a curriculum. It's not heavy-handed in our show, but when we were trying to come up with a title, the only thing that cleared close to what we were looking for was Dewdrop Diaries. And we were kind of like, we need a diary moment at the show if we're going to call it that. And so conversations began to be, what could those diaries be about? What is there some kind of small curriculum we could, or theme we could put into those diaries and not just make it a wrap up? And so we knew that we were already having characters that were kind of thankful for their dewdrops, but they always kind of whisper, "Thank you, Dewdrop," if they feel like they've gotten help from their secret little fairy. And so, gratitude seemed like a natural thing. And there was a thing called gratitude journals that was, it was new to me, gratitude journals in general. And so when someone brought that up, I'm like, wow, that just kind of, everything's starting kind of naturally gel. And at that point, we're like, is there a unique way? Because kids can't really write or read at this point, our youngest viewers. So, or they're just starting that journey. So is there unique ways to have journals? So we started this whole conversation about how, like, my daughter, when she's older, but when she's frustrated, she likes to go draw. And so maybe one of the characters draws their gratitude and draws a picture of it. And then we had one, that has a memory box, our Phoebe, our crafter, has a memory box, and which is really kind of a craft box. And she puts a memento from the day's events and that she's thankful for what happened. And so it became this kind of natural progression about gratitude, and it just really just worked for the show overall. So again, it's one of those things we talked about at the top about how it's this organic conversation with the executives and everybody involved until you get to this, wonderful place.
No, that's so interesting though that it kind of came about, because I think in my head I was thinking, oh, Rick must have come in with that idea in mind, but that's so interesting. It came in later. All right, and then I know one other question for Sarah. We had read, and we wanted to ask this, and we learned that for your guys' show, you worked with an oceanographer.
Oceanographer.
If I could say that word. During the world building process, and we were wondering just how that working with somebody who has that background, how that affected your storytelling process.
Yeah, DreamWorks is really good at giving us access to a lot of diverse, unique, different writers from different backgrounds. Like, a lot of our writers we brought on didn't necessarily have any television writing background, let alone preschool background. So Darcy Littlebadger, the oceanographer, she was one of them. Our exec, Pete Cassioppo, met her at some conference. She wrote like fantasy novels based on kind of more of her Native American culture folklore. And we met with her. She was really fascinating. We thought, wow, with her creativity and imagination and her perspective from her culture and background, she could bring a really interesting take to the storytelling process from that angle. And then we didn't realize that actually her having a PhD in oceanography was the one that actually, like, we really influenced us in the storytelling and world building as well, in the fact that we always knew that the ocean was going to be based more in a real sense of an ocean. Like, there's nothing, like, if you imagine the ocean, that's kind of what we created in our ocean world. Whereas our unicorn world, we got to play and be fantastic and use magic and like create this kind of like fantastical world. And so it was kind of like the unicorn land is magical and fantastical, but the ocean's quite real. But it was Darcy that started to point out all the natural magic of the ocean, which we're like, wow, just based in what really exists in our real world, the ocean is almost more magical almost than the stuff that we're creating for the unicorns. So she would talk to us about bioluminescence. So we had a whole episode with that. She taught us things about, like, she would just know stuff about, she knew about like a pilot fish and I can't remember the name of the shark, but they have this like symbiotic mutualistic relationship where they actually live together, and the little pilot shark constantly cleans the shark on, like, cleans off the barnacles from the shark, and then the shark protects the little pilot fish. So that became a whole story. So just based on her knowledge of the ocean, we got so much magic and so many story opportunities from that. And it was just amazing to have her be part of our writing staff.
That's amazing. I didn't realize they were part of your writing staff, but yeah, that is.
Well, I mean, we had a freelance room, so she ended up writing a few episodes for us.
Got it. But yeah, no, I mean, like, that's amazing that you learned the ocean was just as magical as the world you were creating in real life. All right, so I know we have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to try to get to some of these questions we have. All right, let's see here. I guess there's a general question. There's a couple questions like this. Maybe all of you can touch on this. Do you have any advice for anyone aspiring to be a writer, EP, work their way up in preschool television?
I mean, I can say the key words are work your way up. I think that a lot of times it's really great if somebody has the strong desire to be a showrunner or an EP, but there's a lot that has to happen, I think, on the way up in order to be an effective showrunner or EP. I've seen people who got there too quickly and maybe struggled a little bit. So I think there are a lot of different paths to becoming an EP and showrunner. I know just the 4 people on here talking have some different paths. Probably Brian and my paths are more similar. But I think the most important thing is to really take that time to learn story, learn writing if you want to come up on the writing path. And if you're coming up on more of the art side, like I did, to really understand storytelling as a storyboard artist, because so much of what you do as an EP on the story side is going to be making sure the storytelling that has been approved in the script is then able to be applied visually. And there are many times where a wrong storyboard, a bad storyboard can really destroy a great script. So it's a big responsibility. So if you don't know yourself about camera shots, about acting, about visual language, you're not going to be able to be an effective showrunner on that's coming from that side. So I think it's really about taking your time to start as a storyboard revisionist, maybe work as a PA. That's what I did. I worked in production first and I got to learn about production. And then I started in animation myself. That was a different time. You probably wouldn't want to do that now, but to take that time to really learn the ropes so that when the opportunities started to come up for me with starting with directing and development, that I had enough skill to be able to communicate a vision and work with whomever my writing partner was to implement that vision for the show.
I'll add from the writing side of it, as Aliki pointed out, start by writing the scripts. Don't think you're going to be a showrunner right away. If there's no real shortcut, some people get lucky and they get their start sooner than later. A lot of them flame out early because they just haven't accrued the skills over time. But I think it's really just put in the work, put in the time, and also ask questions along the way. Don't be afraid to say, hey, can I take a look at the animatics? Because you can get on a show and never see an animatic as a staff writer. I was always like, can I come to a production meeting? Can I go to a voiceover, recording session? I was always asking, and I think for writers also, which you're never become a story editor, a head writer. When you do become that point, you've never had really an opportunity to rewrite other people. I mean, if you just get that job, you come up. So, I recommend to people like, hey, ask your friends if you can give notes on their scripts, or when you read the scripts, give notes and don't even give it to them. Practice rewriting someone else's scripts, or if you're in an opportunity, not your first week on staff somewhere, but after a while, ask if you can kind of rewrite a freelancer script. I mean, it's not going to be automatic. Your showrunner is not going to think that way, so you have to help remind them because they're so busy thinking about so many other things. And also, just building on what Aliki said, is like the visual language. Like when I knew I was going to be showrunner in the show, I took a storyboarding class. I could draw like a 4-year-old. And I still do, but at least I understood how to communicate better with directors once I had that opportunity. And I learned so much working with Aliki, because she'd give me lessons. Like, she's like, we need to field out, half a frame here. By the time she was done, I'm giving notes saying we need to field in a whole field. And it was just kind of a fun experience. And she would even test me like, what's going on right here, Rick? Is the script washed? What's going on? And so I learned so much from a visual standpoint, because she actually had to take off for another show in the last couple months of the show. And I'm like, it's like, I don't have my visual co-showrunner here. And I was able to do it. because of what she taught me. So it's all about learning and continuing to learn and not being afraid to ask questions.
Well, and people will say to me, my kid draws and they want to do what you do. And I will say, tell them to take a writing class, like vice versa. If you really want to get to that show running place, you really need to learn a little bit about both. I'm sure these guys have awesome things to say too about this.
Yeah, definitely echo all that. And also, like, I'm going to call out Natalia. My glasses on. Natalia is asking, like, if you sell a show as a creator, what role might you get? And if you haven't come up through the system, you know, like if Rick had pitched you, like, number one, at a company like DreamWorks, somebody who's never done anything, the odds of them coming in and pitching something and getting it bought is very small. And in fact, I don't know if it's ever happened. And then, but no matter where you are, like if you don't have that experience being around shows as a writer, as a boarder, as a director, whatever, you know, it's the truth is you're probably not going to get much of a role, even if your idea gets sold, because they're going to be looking for people with experience in those things. So really, if you want to be a show creator, the best way, like Aliki said, is to start as a board artist or as a writer and just build your experience, build your network, you build your relationships, and you know, sort of scaffold your own career towards, you know, getting to do what Rick did, which is pitch a show and then actually run it yourself.
But it takes time.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I really relate to what Rick was saying, because coming at it from the writer's perspective, we weren't initially going to be the co-EPs of Narwhal when we sold it. We were slated to be the story editors. And that is my background, is writing, and Nakia came through this through the writer's perspective. And we were given the opportunity. They paired us with Brian. We were very lucky because Brian has so much experience and he knows about that whole side of the world. So what Aliki's saying, if you're like coming from an art perspective, learn the writing perspective. If you're coming from a writing perspective, learn the art perspective, because that's a world that was totally closed off to me. My writing partner had a bit more experience in that side of things because she's worked in animation in a production capacity before. So she knew a bit more than I did, but it was a huge learning curve. And I'm just so thankful we had Brian to help us, and just the whole support and team of DreamWorks really, really helped us have, it was a co-EP, but also crash course in learning how to be co-EP course, all wrapped into one. And it was a lot. So Aliki's advice about like working your way up might have been like a bit more comforting and more comfortable way to do it than being thrown in. But it was good. And now we're on the other side, and I'm, you know, we have our show and learned a lot.
Yeah, and then there's a third part of this brain, because Aliki and I represent sort of the visual side of the brain. Rick and Sarah represent the writing side. Like we've already said, those commingle. There's a third side of the brain that's not represented here, which is the line producer and just the production management aspects of things. And that's a whole other side of the job that you have to learn, you know, because we, you know, as the creatives, you know, we're, I don't know, most days 70% creative, but then we're still 30% management, because we can't, even though the line producer is the one responsible for the staffing and the budget and the schedule and all those things, like we can't just blow past all that. We're still, you know, we still have to be aware of those things. We're still managing people. We're still managing people's feelings and, you know, like having to deal with lots of interpersonal stuff. So, you know, aside from all the creative stuff, there's also a huge amount of management experience that comes into it as well. And, you know, partnering that we do with our line producers in order to get these things made. So it's a lot.
It's a lot. I think a lot, like, now that I think about it too, like just the people you work with, surrounding yourself, like, because like I mentioned, we got thrown into this role and it's sink or swim. But if we were not with the right people or the right support or the right team, I don't know if we would have succeeded. So I think it's like the people you work with and surround yourself with that can help you in your pursuits and your dreams. Like that's really, really important if you can find those people.
I think that's such a good point. I mean, even for me, like I was finding like, okay, I kind of fumble my way through lighting. Like I don't, because there's the line producer and then there's also the art director, and the art director tends to be the person who's a master at color and lighting. And even now, after I've done all this stuff I've done, I'm like, I'm so tired of not really feeling comfortable in lighting. And like, I took a lighting class, even though I had no time to paint or do anything, because I have a million kids and working in production and all that, just to like tune in every week, learn the language and see examples and understand the difference between bounce light and diffuse light and just all this kind of stuff to be able to be more effective in my job. And then I would go to our art director on our show, and I just kept asking him questions, or when I would hear him giving feedback in a meeting afterwards, I'd say, hey, Matt, I heard you talk about this, this, and this. What does that mean exactly? So, you know, we're all still learning. We're all continuing to expand, and people in animation generally really like to share their knowledge. They're like really nice people. So people are here to help and support and share what they know and like hold your hand if you need it.
No, it's a great community. And like you all said, it's great to learn what other people are doing, because it's so essential to when you give higher up to know, you know, and work alongside all these amazing people. And unfortunately with that, we are out of time. But I want to thank the four of you for joining us today. This has been such an insightful conversation. It was so great to hear about both your processes and just the end results creating these two wonderful shows. We thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all the audience watching. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. We do have another panel coming up actually right now, our Hispanic Heritage Month panel, so definitely tune into that. But let's thank our panelists for joining us today, and please continue to support CMA. We have a lot of events coming up that we'd love for you to be a part of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Bye.